As Luther's call for reform echoed across Europe, the question emerged, what should reform look like? And who should be authorized to determine the dimensions of reform? Luther had demolished the Catholic Church's claim that only the Pope could interpret Scripture. But if not the Pope, then who? In the northern German city of Münster, this question of authority resulted in one of the most bizarre and violent episodes of the Reformation. In the summer of 1533, led by a charismatic preacher, Münster's craftsmen revolted, took control of the city, and decreed an end to infant baptism. Münster became the first city governed by Anabaptists, those people who argued that infant baptism was not biblical and therefore not Christian. The situation in Münster spiraled out of control when the Anabaptists invited Jan Mathis, a Dutch Anabaptist, to lead the city's church. Mathis believed he was a prophet, inspired by the voice of God, and that this inspiration allowed him to interpret Scripture. He set out to turn Münster into a new Jerusalem, guided by his personal visions of God. And he set about to kill the ungodly of the city. On Easter 1534, an ecstatic Mathis became convinced he was the Old Testament warrior Gideon. He charged forth from the city's walls with a handful of followers and attacked a massive Catholic and Lutheran army that had begun to besiege the city. Mathis was promptly killed, and rule over Münster fell to another Dutchman, Jan Boykelts, who declared himself King of New Jerusalem. For Boykelts, like Mathis before him, Reformation meant the recreation of the Old Testament kingdom of the Israelites. Polygamy was instituted, with King Boykelts claiming multiple wives for himself. He and his appointed executioner, Bernhard Knipperdolling, began to execute the ungodly of the city. After a dinner party for the city's leaders, for instance, Boykelts amused his guests by bringing forth an opponent of his rule and personally cutting off the man's head in front of them. Another critic of Boykelts, this time one of his wives, suffered a similar fate. Boykelts beheaded her in the marketplace and organized a dance around her body. Ultimate authority in Münster lay with King Boykelts, who saw himself as King David reincarnate, in direct conversation with God. He sought a literal imposition of Scripture and a return to an Old Testament prophetic monarchy. And this is not what Luther had meant by sola scriptura. Now, the story of the Anabaptist kingdom of Münster ends brutally. Besieged by Catholics and Lutherans, the city began to starve, and in the summer of 1535, the city fell to its former ruler, the Prince Bishop of Münster. The bishop had Boykelts, Knipperdolling, and their chief preacher brought to a gallows in the city, in the marketplace, where they were torn to pieces with red-hot iron tongs and finally stabbed in the heart. Their ruined bodies were placed in cages and hung from a steeple of a city church. Where does this story of prophecy and hyper-violence leave us? The events of Münster terrified mainline reformers and curtailed claims of prophecy. The Anabaptists became determined pacifists and renounced the violence of Münster. Münster became a symbol of excess, of the dangers of unrestrained Reformation. And as for the cages that were hung on the city church in 1534, they remained there until the church was destroyed in World War II. And upon rebuilding the church, the city decided to re-hang the cages, where they remain to this day. They are a symbol of the Reformation's profound potential for violence.